one of the opportunities in having a close relationship with someone, it doesn't have to be a marriage, but they can look at, they're sort of a mirror for your relationship with money.
Right.
Because otherwise I'm just living my own life with my lawn furniture,
Right.
my mattress on the floor. I'm fine. I'm going to save and invest every penny I get.
Right.
It took her in my life to sort of go, hey, like, here's a little mirror, like you're kind of extreme.
Right.
So I think that is one of the benefits if you're open-minded to really accepting the healing potential and growth potential that your partner is providing.
Welcome to the Healthy Love and Money podcast. If you find money to be the number 1, 2, or even third largest source of stress in your relationship, then you're in the right place. Going beyond how to budget, invest, and do your taxes, we're going to explore financial intimacy. Discover how to talk with your partner about your shared financial life. Let's take the awkward and painful out of money conversations. Join me and hit follow to listen to weekly inspiring, healing, and motivating interviews with financial therapists, couples therapists, and financial planners, and so many more. Let's go on the journey of financial intimacy together. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Healthy Love and Money podcast. Today, it's my distinct honor to welcome Dr. Brad Klontz to the show. And I'm so excited to have him on the show because he was one of my first role models in the field of financial psychology and financial therapy. I've read a number of his books, and he's got a new one coming out called Start Thinking Rich, 21 Harsh Truths to Take You from Broke to Financial Freedom. And so he's here to share his powerful money message, deep psychological insight, and probably some just darn good stories. Brad, welcome to the show.
I'm really happy to be here, happy to chat with you. And I want healthy love and healthy money. So I'm feeling the vibe. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I like that. All those good mojo feels. You know, the biggest thorn in my side around money has been, how do I talk with my wife about this thing? Because, man, that is like compound interest is easy once you kind of get it. Investing, okay, fine. But like, what's she going to think of me if I say this? That's the stuff that kind of trips me up. And it turns out it seems to trip up a good number of other people. What do you think?
Yeah, so you probably have the same problem I have. My wife doesn't see money exactly the way that I think she should see it in every area. And conversely, I don't either. I think it's sort of like, it's a fantasy. The weird people, let me put it this way. The weird people, I think, are the couples who totally agree about everything when it comes to money. They're the weirdos. And I'm slightly envious, but I also doubt it. Really? Do you really? Or is one of you really not speaking your truth?
Which is probably the more likely reality, right? Is when couples say they're all on the same page about everything, they never fight. To me, that is the biggest warning flag that there's problems you can't see because you're not willing to see it. And so this sets up really nicely into your book and the work that you're doing. But what are some of those air quote harsh truths that people need to really step into in their relationship with each other to make forward progress?
Yeah, so it's so funny. Like in our book, we have 21 harsh truths. They're all like slaps in the face. But I actually didn't have any on couples. The only harsh truth I had on couples was go to college, get married, and buy a house. And essentially, we looked at the statistics around those things in terms of, is it still worth it to go to college? Is it still worth it, quote, to get married? And a lot of this is sort of cultural, and this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, and I won't stay here too long. But there's this whole, like, if you're on social media much, there's this whole like male, and I would almost say it's a toxic kind of male energy out there around how it's not worth it to get married anymore. There's this whole dark hole on the internet. Don't go find this. I've like slipped into it a couple times, and I'm just like, whoa! Like there's an entire like movement around not getting married because we can't trust women because they're going to take all our money. And ironically, when you sit back and look at it, like there's not a lot of money. These people don't seem to have a lot of money, and they're really worried about it. And so what's interesting though, for me, I try to maintain an open mind. And so I'm like, okay, so is truly marriage a bad financial decision?
Right.
Well, certainly I know divorces. Okay, let's start with that. It's a terrible financial decision. But is marriage a bad decision? And so just looking at the numbers, the average married person between the ages of like 25, 35 has like 10x the net worth as the average single person. So I was like, oh, okay, all right. So I didn't make a terrible financial decision by getting married. by following my heart.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyway, I'm not sure what your question was, but in terms of marriage, like I feel like we do talk about why it's really important to talk to your partner around money.
Yeah.
So you mentioned people saying, "Hey, everything's fine. We don't fight." My parents divorced when I was 2 years old. I don't remember that day, but I do remember the horrific experience I had the entire rest of my childhood because people divorce now, they're all nice when they do it. They weren't nice back when it was happening.
Back in the day, it wasn't.
Back in the day, nobody was nice. They hated each other, and they let it be known. And so as a little kid too, I started to study. I think one of the reasons I became a psychologist was to figure out how not to let that happen and leave my kids in that situation, the situation my sister and I grew up in. And one of the things I found is that they said they never fought about anything. And I was like, oh, okay, that's not good.
Yeah.
So that's an awareness I have.
Right. Well, I think that's the trap that I fell into with my wife when we were newly married. We just celebrated 18 years this month. And, those first 2 or 3 years, you're making all your new couple friends and you're hanging out and people are talking about the conflicts they're having. And I'm like, I'm all ego and proud, like, yeah, we don't have any fights. We're good. Meanwhile, I was unaware of this pit in my stomach that was growing because I couldn't relate. I couldn't figure out I'm now the money expert, hun. You're the dentist. I'm telling you, this is what you should do to be the most profitable dentist. And she's like, no, I don't want to buy a building. No, I don't want to start a practice. And I'm just kind of hammering at her in a nice guy way, but I'm hammering at her. And finally I got the message, back off. But, it's that conflict avoidant is a learned adaptation.
Yeah, no, it is. And I have fallen into this and I'm absolutely convinced of this because I've seen it so many times. The quote, nicest guys, I'll pick on guys right now. The quote, nicest guys who like, oh, I don't want to cause a conflict and I don't want to speak this. They end up becoming the biggest assholes. They truly do. And it's because they have this internal angst and frustration or whatever, and they don't want to express it. And then it just comes out on all these sideways. It's going to come out. It's going to come out. And so just sort of reframing that, I don't want to say anything to like upset the apple cart. Yeah. We don't want like conflict, whatever. It is going to turn you into a person who is passive aggressive and kind of nasty. It's sort of the opposite of how we would view ourselves as being nice. We become not so nice.
Well, and then it's like we wake up one day and we're like, how did I become this person? Wait, I thought I was a nice person. And now like I'm having all these really evil thoughts. And hopefully you're not executing on some of them, but they're there. But that's a big signal. You need to figure out who you actually are and how to stand for what you need to stand for.
Yeah, we suffer. Have you heard of normative male alexithymia? Have you heard of that concept?
Okay, say that one more time. This is a nice big word.
It's kind of cool. So yeah, it is normative male alexithymia.
Okay, all right.
And so this is something that has been researched quite extensively. Yeah. Normative means it's normal. Obviously, we know what male means. Alexithymia is Latin for without words for emotions. This is sort of a normal way of being for males, for men, and a lot of it is thought to be culturally bound. Right. So it's not like we were born not knowing our feelings. It was socialized out of us. Yeah. And there's actually some evidence to show that young boys tend to be a little bit more emotionally sensitive. Yeah. Which is really fascinating. And then it sort of gets hammered out of you as a boy. Yeah. And so then we grow up and it's so crazy because I have this perception of myself of being extremely in touch with my feelings. I'm a therapist. I sit there, I'm there, I'm with you. Oh yes. By the way, I feel it. I empathize. Yeah. But my wife is just like, dude, you're so out of touch with your feelings. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I have no idea what she's talking about. I used to fight it. And then sure enough, like, I'll be going along and all of a sudden I get hit with like an illness because my body's like saying, dude, you're tired, you're stressed. And I'm like totally unaware of being stressed, And so I've actually just acknowledged this. Yeah. And so we struggle to come up with the words. We struggle to even know we're having a feeling. We just let things go. And meanwhile, as you said, it sort of boils under the surface and we're living out of integrity, integrity in the sense that I want to have an open, honest communicative relationship with my wife, but I'm holding things back.
Right.
Like there are literally things that are upsetting me that I'm not talking about. And that ends up becoming toxic in our relationship.
Brad, it's like you know me. I think I would fit this description. Normative male alexithymia. I'm flashing back to learning that word in grad school, alexithymia. And like, this is how far gone I was. I couldn't wrap my head around the meaning of that. Like the idea that people have emotions. I mean, it feels so crazy to say that now, but it's taken me over 10 years of getting in contact with the reality that I have emotions, that other people have emotions, that it takes a hell of a lot more than just being a nice person to actually connect with someone. It actually takes emotional intelligence. And that part of that is being able to look in the mirror and know like when I'm feeling things. And I mean, I love that you highlighted like, yeah, also learning my body is giving me all kinds of signals that I'm not doing okay. Right. And like, I remember I was in my MBA program and, I'm sitting there studying for the finance exam. But before I go in and take the test, I'm in the bathroom and my stomach is absolutely locked down. Fear and anxiety. I had no idea how to even name or tell anybody. I was terrified to take this finance exam. And, tying this around to our relationship with money and how emotions get tied with money, how does that work? How do emotions end up getting so darn wrapped up in the way that we experience money?
Well, I think money is one of those weird things that innervates every aspect of our lives. And it's pretty unconscious for most of us because it is so permeates everything. Yeah. And I think it's real easy to just not be aware of it and aware of our feelings around it. And part of it comes to, our money scripts and how they're developed in childhood and how it's the water we're swimming in. This is just reality. Yeah. Like I remember being in a couples therapy session. My least favorite type, by the way, is when I'm the client with my wife. It's much easier for me to be the therapist with the couple. Yep. But I remember our therapist confronting me around money, and as soon as he started, so I have all this resistance to being in therapy, which is just terrible. Right? But because I'm like the worst client. I try to be good, but he's like starts to talk about money, and I'm like, dude, you're a therapist, you're terrible with money. I'm not going to listen to any of this. But I was trying to be really open-minded. Yeah. And he said something like, Brad, I get the sense that you're really worried about being poor someday. And he said, and I got to tell you, I don't think you're ever going to be poor again. He said, but your stress and anxiety around money will kill you. And no, he actually said, is killing you, which was even more powerful. Yeah. And I was just like, oh my God. Like it just really set me back. And I just saw myself in a whole new light. It's almost like my observer self popped out of my head and I was sitting there looking at how I was going through life emotionally around money and realizing like, oh man, it's so extreme. Like it was a huge shift for me. And part of it is growing up not having money. Right. Just being aware of that constantly. I was aware of all the terrible feelings about what it felt like to not be able to be as dressed as well and not be able to have access to things. And other people got to take like karate lessons, for example. And for my birthday, I got 3 months of it and then it was gone. And it was at the local rec center, It wasn't like it was really expensive dojo. Okay. And just feeling miserable about it. And I realized that I grew up with so much anxiety. Like I am not going to be poor again. It's almost like this was going in my head the whole time. I'm not going to be poor. And so my wife would say something like, it sounds so ridiculous that it's not true, but it's true. She said something like, when we were first dating, like, hey, maybe you should get a couch. And in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be poor again. Because I had lawn chairs for furniture. I literally did. And I'm like, I'm almost 40. I never bought a couch my whole life. But every time she said something like that, I was almost like wanted to sort of like, she was poverty. She was going to make me poor. And I sort of projected that onto her. Yes. And so that was sort of the pattern. And so this is, by the way, this is one of the reasons that in all the research that I've done, it looks like married people compared to single people are healthier when it comes to money. Right. So not only do they have higher net worth, they have healthier money scripts, healthier financial behaviors. And I think one of the opportunities in having a close relationship with someone, it doesn't have to be a marriage, but they can look at, they're sort of a mirror for your relationship with money.
Right.
Because otherwise I'm just living my own life with my lawn furniture,
Right.
my mattress on the floor. I'm fine. I'm going to save and invest every penny I get.
Right.
It took her in my life to sort of go, hey, like, here's a little mirror. Like, you're kind of extreme.
Right.
So I think that is one of the benefits, if you're open-minded to really accepting the healing potential and growth potential that your partner is providing.
Oh, listeners, just go ahead and rewind about 30 seconds and re-listen to this. This is the crux of the issue. Brad, what you didn't preface, but I'm going to put it in there, is this is the point of marriage. Like, what's the meaning and purpose of marriage? And in my book, at least, this is a big part of it, is your partner can hold up a mirror to you. And most of us end up getting really offended. But what we really need to see is that there's an opportunity here. You were attracted to each other because you brought different things to the table, whether you knew it or not. And they may be holding a mirror up to you, but you also get to hold up a mirror to your partner. Brad, can you give us an example of like how you've held up a money mirror to your wife?
Yeah. So first of all, I've never talked about any of this. So you're a great therapist. You got me going.
Crack that nut wide open. Here we go.
Exactly. I feel so safe. Like, it's just us.
Surprise.
People out there, don't judge me.
Don't send Brad any nasty emails, please. Just send them to me.
I actually love talking about, like, I actually feel like I am very happy to talk about my struggles with money. I mean, some people in some corners of the world view me as, a leading expert in this area. And I always feel like it's really helpful to just talk about what a hot mess I was and I am, and and how it's an ongoing process. I just feel like that helps people.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm actually happy to do it. But I think my wife was attracted to me in part because she wasn't as forward thinking around money. So she grew up in a different family system. And her family system was we're fine around money. We're fine.
Okay.
Everything's fine. And so she grew up upper middle class, and it's sort of like, when she turned 16, she got a new car for her birthday. So, which by the way is fabulous. I'm not making any judgments around any of it. But I think she saw in her life that she was sort of missing some of the planning for the future around money because she had this mindset that, everything's going to be fine.
Okay.
And she was a super hard worker. Don't get me wrong. I mean, she's a clinical psychologist herself, so very accomplished. But I think when it came to, I think she saw in me like, so he's going to take care of that.
Oh, right.
You know?
Yep.
And so that was an attractive part of the partnership.
Yeah.
And what I learned to do, and I think what I was really attracted to is like, wow, she's really enjoying life, and not excessively. Well, it's so funny because I talk about her as the spender. She is not. It's only in relative to me. Yes. She is not an overspender in any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
But it emotionally felt like it to me. It's like, do you know how much couches cost? Good Lord. And so I think what happens too is over time, people can become really extreme in their positions around things because we are so desperate to try to balance the other one out, or draw them over to our side.
Right.
And so that's one of the challenges, I think, with not looking at this sort of, like I said, as an observer of what's happening in your relationship. And that's why therapists can be so good, because they're sitting there like literally observing it.
Right.
and sharing their observations.
Right.
And I think because you can get really extreme where all of a sudden, if I'm super anxious that she's going to overspend, I'll get extreme around what percentage of money we need to be investing and saving because I'm so afraid.
Yes.
And she might get extreme around spending in ways that may not even fit if she was by herself, fit with her. But she's trying to pull me away from being such an extreme, anxious scarcity saver.
Yeah. I mean, the natural tendency, of course, is to make it about myself as I hear you and think about all the ways it relates to me. But
please do. This isn't therapy. This is us talking. Go ahead.
I'll translate this to a couple that I'm working with right now. Great couple, really engaged in trying to figure out how do we relate to each other around money. But they're working through a big life transition, bringing a baby into the world. They're both entrepreneurs. And one of them is like, okay, we need to ratchet back a few places here and make some adjustments. And the other one is like, oh no, yes, we value travel, but we're cutting that to zero. And just that, like hearing you talk about it, is that just locking down hard. And I'm watching this unfold. And the other partner is just getting bigger and more upset the more they lock down. And so now they're getting further and further apart from each other. And it's like, and this is how it goes in the absence of help, right? Because when we get into that distressed state in our mind, we lose our capacity for being empathic and curious and compassionate. And our partner went from this beautiful, attractive person to like Cruella de Vil or Mr. Scrooge. And the last thing you want to do is hug one of those two people. But what we're missing is like, oh, it's those old fears that are getting triggered up in them again. We've lost the reality that like, oh, our net worth is great for our age and stage of life. And this is what's so interesting as on the financial planner side of things is we get to look at the objective financial data. And we can make some reasonable assumptions about where you're likely going to be. But just because those models say you're going to be okay doesn't mean between your ears it's going to be okay.
Yeah, and it can feel like your spouse is the biggest threat to your financial well-being or the biggest threat to you being able to enjoy life. And we treat them that way.
That's a mic drop, Brad. That is, I've never said those words out loud, but hearing them out loud from you, I mean, I have thought that. I've been in that dark hole. And it was in that, like, because I have that, I have to be rich to be okay story in my head. And this is the shadow side of like partnering with my wife is I was coming from being a firefighter and she's on the path to being a dentist. And I'm like, and this is, I think, one of the start thinking rich, like harsh truths. Not in a, like, I don't think it's framed as don't marry up, but marrying for money or like having this fantasy that somebody else is going to rescue you financially. I gave up my own financial power and agency and just transferred it right over to her. Because I was like, oh, she's got a way better earning career. Like we'll be rich sooner. This will be great. And in my excitement and naivete and insecurity that I couldn't name or own, I was putting a lot of pressure on her to get performing and making money. And I gave up my own sense of agency that I can be economically productive myself. And I got in this rabbit hole trap in my head. It was like, I'll never be able to make as much money as her. She's a dentist. She's just so far ahead of me. I'll just never catch her. And so collapse, depression, self-loathing. And one of the harsh truths that you talk a lot about in your book is learned helplessness and the lack of, what is it called? Internal locus of control versus external locus of control. So I just put all that kind of in your lap. Walk us through, what did I just say? What does that mean?
Yeah, so a big part of the book is a bunch of the chapter titles really sort of hit at that locus of control being so important. Yeah. Like one of our chapters is your political party doesn't give a shit about you. And the message there is, I grew up, as I said, lower income. People are sometimes surprised by that because my father has a doctorate, but I actually got mine before he got his, which is interesting.
Ooh.
Yeah, they grew up public school teachers. And, you know, when they divorced when I was 2, things were rough, right? My mom had to get people in to rent rooms in the house, to pay the mortgage. But essentially, and what I saw in that environment, what I saw was people who would believe and be hopeful about somebody coming in and rescuing them. And so we use this whole idea of external locus control. We use the government as an example, politics, because I remember seeing, like, what I would see is candidates talk about all the stuff they're going to give low income people and how they're going to help them out. And then what I would see is people really passionate about these candidates because they're going to help us. They're going to save finally someone. And then what I've noticed too, in preparation for this book, I'm like, well, I don't think they did anything. Let me go check. And when you look at the poverty numbers in the United States my entire life. They haven't changed at all. I mean, they've been exactly the same. And so regardless of who you feel, and by the way, the other perspective too here, and I've had to unwind my own like money avoidance and hatred towards rich people growing up in that environment. But I was thinking they're just, all these people are rich. All these politicians are rich and they're just trying to get your vote, one way or the other. So anyway, but so we just use it as an example. We're not taking a position around political party,
Right.
but it's sort of a message that you cannot wait, okay, for the government to help you.
Right.
And by the way, your company too. Let's talk about corporations. Like they don't care about you either. They really don't. Like your coworkers might, your boss might, but years ago, they used to have pensions for you. Like you could say your company maybe cared when there's a pension and when you retire, you're going to get a gold watch. And not only that, you're going to get a monthly payment. And then when you die, your spouse is going to get that payment.
Right.
That's the way it used to be. So your companies actually did care about you, I would say. Now it's defined contribution. They don't care about you anymore. Yeah. They don't. They literally are not going to take care of you. They're certainly not going to help you become financially free.
Right.
That's the last thing they want because then they lose you as an employee. So there's countless examples of things that people pin their hopes on. And it really is demonstrative of an external locus of control, which essentially locus of control is the outcomes in your life. What do you attribute them to? Is it you? Is it internal factors? Is it because of your hustle or lack of hustle? Is it because of your smarts or lack of smarts around investing or whatever? Or is it because of greedy bankers, the politicians, the either hoping they're going to help you or blaming your entire life on them? Both of those are equally damaging, I would say, to somebody's ability to climb the socioeconomic ladder.
So can we add into that list? And my story was my spouse. She's going to be my financial savior. Right. And this is kind of ties back to what we were saying just a little bit ago, is like, my spouse is my biggest barrier to my financial independence. Right. Like that. Right. Because like, if you're going to be the one that's making all the money, but you won't do the things to make the money that I think we need to make, that's a big problem. So there's that piece. But then the other thing that I've observed, and I don't think I got too far down this slippery slope, maybe I'd further than I care to admit, but is external locus of control on some divine person image. Like God will provide. And this, I realize is a slippery slope for some folks, but can we name that can also be a dynamic for people where they're over spiritualizing their financial life and giving up some agency?
Yeah. So we'll just pick on the Bible right now. We'll just talk about the Bible and Christianity. And it's a great place for confirmation bias, by the way. So like if you hold a certain set of beliefs around something, like for example, money is bad and rich people are greedy and evil. Right. Oh, there's plenty of verses you can pull from to reinforce that. If you think that, God wants you to be wealthy and successful and abundant, there's plenty of verses you can go find to support that argument also. Right. And by the way, we actually do that in this book. We actually present the Bible verses in favor of God wanting you to be wealthy and abundance and all that. And then the ones that rich people are horrific human beings. And so, yeah, because you can make either argument.
Yes, you can make either argument. And that's, for me, I got my master's in therapy at a seminary. And one of the things they actually force you to do is actually study the Bible. Yeah. And that was actually a gift because it taught me to think critically about this stuff. And it helped me see that it really is in the eye of the beholder, how you interpret what's going on there and what that means.
Yeah. And I think that, like, to me, I don't necessarily see it as inconsistencies. I see it as the truth is just very complex. And there's certainly plenty of examples that people who have sold their soul and their ethics in the pursuit of wealth and have destroyed their family, their children, their health, their relationships, the earth. There's plenty of examples of that. And then there's also examples of people who have made money and have gone on to like cure polio, and establish libraries and whatever. So you could do it either way. And I think that's sort of some of the spiritual messaging is be careful. Yeah. Be careful. It's almost like it's a hammer. And you can use a hammer to build a beautiful building that provides safety and shelter. and you can use a hammer to destroy that building.
So what I want to ask as I'm thinking about this is, do you have some favorite go-to exercises for people to, I mean, obviously reading the book is an exercise in itself. Bibliotherapy is a real thing. Reading books can take your mind in a new place. But if let's just put it on couples, because this is the Healthy Love and Money podcast. This is Ed's little bandwagon for just a moment. Lots of people supporting women around money, fully on board with that. Men, not a lot of emotional support for us figuring out how to deal with money and couples. So for the couples that are listening there, this is for you from Dr. Klontz. What is one thing that couples can do to start facing these harsh truths and realities and turn towards each other instead of away from each other?
Okay, so this is something that I essentially made up years ago because I was dealing with so many couples in conflict around money. And what I would do when I was early and naive is I would think that whatever this issue is they're fighting about, that's the issue, right? And so I would sort of dive in and try to help them negotiate this issue. And then what I realized over time is I don't even care about the issue you're fighting about around money. Like, it's like, whatever. It's like, my father once told me that a successful relationship is a series of successful negotiations. Okay. And I initially thought that was so unromantic. I'm like, what are you talking about? But it's true. I mean, like a lasting relationship. So whatever, you're going to be able to negotiate it. I don't really care about that. Right. But so what I had couples do, and I found this to be so powerful, and I called it the conversation. And it's the conversation that they probably should have had on date number 7.
Okay.
Maybe 4. The date where you ask, like, oh, so, do you want to have kids someday? Like, that's a pretty intimate question, isn't it?
Right.
I feel like we should have had a conversation about money. So, but the couples that are sort of in this intractable place around money, I like to set that aside, whatever it is, because usually come down to a percentage of income going this way or that way, and they want you as the arbiter or the therapist to come in and say, it needs to be 20%.
Right.
Whatever, it's like, we don't really care. We know it matters, but we can figure that out. But the conversation is, I like couples to sit and say, like, what was it like for you growing up around money? Now what's so interesting about this exercise is they could be sort of therapists for each other. You just listen and shut up and try to understand your partner's experience around money. So what was it like for them growing up around money? What were their biggest fears around money? What were their goals and aspirations as a kid? Yeah. Maybe their trauma around money, their scariest, happiest, saddest experiences around money. I like this one too. How did they feel about their socioeconomic status growing up?
Yeah.
Like, whatever they were, how did they feel about it? Did they feel wealthy and guilty? Did they feel poor and miserable? How did they feel about it? And then, so, I mean, that is so powerful. So first of all, this, like, nobody talks about that stuff. Nobody even knows that stuff for themselves.
No one even knows to ask those questions. Those questions have not even ever come to mind for most people. Like, I mean, it's in reading your work specifically, like early on in facilitating financial health, where those types of questions even got presented to me. Now, I'm a family therapist, trained as a family therapist. There is no training on how to ask questions about people's relationship and experiences with money. And what I want listeners to really pick up on what Brad just offered is we're asking about both positive and challenging experiences, things that evoked pleasurable emotions and maybe uncomfortable emotions. We're asking about social class. What we're not doing is saying, well, that's not right, or you shouldn't have felt that way. Because we may feel that, well, you should be grateful that you grew up in a wealthy family. I'm imagining this from a partner that came from a lower income. What do you mean that didn't feel good? You should just be grateful. Like, that's a storyline that I just feel like shows up all the time. Misunderstanding that, like, what do you mean? You feel proud of coming from poverty because your family was really together and emotionally supportive of each other and encourage each other to do better for the next generation. So sometimes our partners are going to break the expected storyline on us. And we've got to track with them on that.
Yeah, and your job is to sit there and shut up and look at this as a gift they're giving you. Like, they're telling you about the real parts of their experience.
Yeah.
And you don't want to stop that by telling them they shouldn't be feeling that way, or to look on the bright side, right? Because it's terrible therapy, and it's a terrible way to talk to have this money conversation with your with your partner.
Yeah.
Then I usually like to end it with, what are the things you most appreciate about your partner around money?
Okay.
Because and to really dip into there, and probably it's going to be elements of the things you complain most about too, because it's their carefree way of enjoying a delicious dinner at night and not stressing about the bill.
Right.
For somebody who grew up like me, with my anxiety, it's like, oh, that's horrific. It's actually wonderful.
Yeah.
If you have a little budget set aside and here's the money we're going to spend and just go out to eat, and we're just going to just immerse ourselves in the experience of abundance, whatever. So set up an abundance budget where you should have that experience. Allow yourself to have that experience at some point. Do it in a responsible way so you can feel good about it. And what I have found is that when so first of all, couples who've been not so nice to each other over a period of time, this can be a hard exercise, because I don't want to share my experience because you're going to use it as ammunition against me, or those types of fears and anxieties, but which only build up over resentment over time, because we tend to want to protect ourselves. And we have probably been mean to each other. We probably have used ammunition against each other. So we're all guilty of it, probably. But if you can spend some time, so this exercise could be healing in the sense that maybe your partner for the first time feels like you actually are listening to them. And so I usually train people to sit there, call it sort of a knees to knees exercise, shut up. The only thing that you can do is say, so this is what you're saying. Am I hearing you right? You're not trying to interpret, you're just trying to listen and do that reflective listening, which feels so good. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people pay therapists just because we do that, just because we're there with them listening. And so what an incredible emotional experience you can give your partner. And by the way, if you give your partner this incredible emotional experience, you're going to get something out of it. You're going to get something back from that. And so they're going to want to be more giving to you, and whatever that means. And then after they do that, I'm like, okay, so what was this thing we were fighting about? Oh, well, they wanted this and that. Okay, so what if we do this and that? Okay, fine. Sounds good.
Therapist ninja move number 1. And I love it. I think it is, right? Because people do come to us expecting us to be more like a judge, or more like someone that will just say, well, this is what's fair. This is how you should divide it. These are the culturally sanctioned appropriate ways to do it. And it's not that I couldn't come up with that. I mean, I certainly can come up with like all kinds of recommendations, but neither of you are probably going to feel satisfied about it. And so if you can slow down and work through the resentment and the anger and the hurt that's built up by the human intervention of empathy, compassion, and listening, it might take a little bit to melt off all that resentment that you've built up, but it happens faster than most people realize. Like, empathy is the antidote to the resentment and the shame in most cases, unless your partner truly is a sociopath or something. But by and large, they're not. They're not the worst thing that you've made them out to be.
I thought everyone's partner was a narcissist. That's what I'm seeing online. It's like everybody's married to a narcissist now.
Yes.
But to your point, like there are very few people that do suffer from that disorder. Anyway, I don't want to go too far off. But by the way, do you know what the most effective assessment for narcissism is? One question. Are you a narcissist? And they usually say, hell yeah, I am. Anyway, I thought that was really funny when I saw that research.
That's awesome.
And the other thing people say, oh, my partner's bipolar. And terrible therapists, by the way, will diagnose someone's partner without ever meeting them, just based on what you're saying about them. So this is very, very common actually today in the therapy world. But the point is this, and I'm sort of making light of this, but the point is that we have a tendency to make up these terrible stories about our partner. Yeah. So for example, they're anxious about money because they grew up poor. Maybe if you knew that, maybe if you knew what their deepest fear is, you can have some compassion for it. Because what it's going to feel like in the story you're going to make up is that my partner wants to control me and subjugate me, and they want to dominate me. Right. And it's like, that's how it's going to feel. But when you can understand it comes from this anxiety. And so maybe you can be a partner in helping build up an emergency fund. And what if you were the one talking about, hey, this month, I just want to make sure, like, are we saving and investing the right percentage to reach our financial goals? Like, if you just started to talk like that, even just asking that question,
Right.
it's going to make a dramatic shift in them. And why would you do that? Well, it's because you realize that's their biggest fear and you care.
Yeah.
And conversely, if your biggest fear is that this person is going to be so miserly, you're not going to enjoy life and live life. What if you were the person who said, hey, I know that we've been building up the saving and there's some of it's there. What can we do this week that would feel really sort of like lavish and like would really help us enjoy life? Your partner's going to immediately start to shift. And what an incredible gift. So if you can understand their deepest fear and concern based on where they came from, you can be the person to actually help them with that and be a partner with them in that. And I think it makes it easier for them to be a partner with you in the areas you're most worried about.
Wait, so if I've got this right, each person is not fully responsible for their own figuring it out. Like, you got to go figure your stuff out. Go figure out your own money stuff. Then in an intimate partnership, we get to share some of that responsibility. Now, there's some of my listeners who want to take all the responsibility for, air quote, fixing their partner. Be careful. That's not what we're talking about. But intimate partners have a shared responsibility to each other and themselves to know and work on their money stories and to show up with empathy, curiosity.
Yeah, I think if you know your partner's favorite thing in the world is a glazed donut.
Yeah. Are you talking about yourself, Brad?
Yeah, maybe. From Krispy Kreme. If you knew that, what is your attitude like? Well, you got to get your own donuts. Is that what we do? Or may I not want to surprise my partner with a delicious Krispy Kreme glazed donut every now and then because I know they love it?
Right.
I'm on the side of the fence of maybe that's a gift that you could willingly and lovingly give. And because my guess is there's some gifts you would like, whatever your love language is, a hug, affection, whatever it is. And so, I think that interdependence is a healthy thing. Obviously, entire dependence isn't.
Right.
But find out what your partner fears and what they love and try to show up in a way every now and then to help ease their fears or support them in protecting against that monster out there.
The big, bad, scary.
Might not be good. Might be good.
Brad, we could keep talking for hours. This has been an incredible joy to have the conversation with you. I'm excited for your book to be out in the public. I've had a chance to read an advanced copy of it. Lots of great insights, backed by solid psychological research that guides it. And so you kind of play with that therapist juxtaposition. Normally we expect therapists to be all warm and fuzzy. And so you kind of have those harsh statements, but really the essence of the book has a lot of support and empathy and clarity. It's direct. And so I want to encourage listeners, as you hear this, go out, get yourself a copy, read through it, sit with it, write in the margins if you need to, journal, call up a therapist if you need to. And speaking of which, if people want to reach out, learn more about you, where should they go? What should they be thinking there?
Yeah, so I will say this, they are harsh truths. I wrote them with the idea that every now and then when I worked in a low-income high school with kids for 20 years, I'd be like, look, dude, and I'd get up and I'd shut the door. I'd make sure no one's listening out there, and then I would just give it to them straight.
Yeah, right.
And by the way, this is how I raise my kids. I give it to them straight, and because I love them, and I don't want them to suffer. Right. And so you might feel like the chapter title is a bit of a slap in the head, but set it down, take some deep breaths, and then try to read about the love that's in there because that's really where it comes from. So for this, I would encourage people to go to startthinkingrich.com/healthylove. And there we'll have a link to the book and we'll have some other giveaways just for your audience. We'll know that they came there through that link. So that's where you can find me.
All right. So that's startthinkingrich.com/healthylove. We'll have the link in the show notes so you don't have to jot it down. You can just go and see the show notes and get that. Brad, thank you so much for the work and leadership that you do in helping people really just explore. And before we hit record, you talked about, I want to hit Wall Street bestseller, New York Times. That would be great. But really what I want to do is positively impact people. And so take the time, grab the book for yourself. And if you get something valuable, send them a note and say, hey, thanks. This really helped me. Brad, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
I invite you now to stop for 5 or 10 minutes and reflect on what you just heard. Maybe even journal about it. Give yourself the time to consider what you just heard and what it means to you. By giving yourself the time to reflect and integrate what you just heard, it will help you along your journey of learning, healing, and growing towards financial intimacy in your life. Please like and follow this podcast and share with someone that would benefit from being on the journey of financial intimacy. Wishing you healthy love and money, Ed.